welcome. This is our first of 2 fermenting classes that we're so excited to offer. So we have Molly here with us for our Gathered and Grown series. And before I turn it over to her, I just want to do a land acknowledgement. I am up here in Fairbanks, and this is the Trothieta campus. I'm actually at home, right? But we are on the ancestral lands of the Dene Athabascan people, and we just want to acknowledge that. Molly is down in Knik, and she will do her own land acknowledgement, but we are really excited because she went foraging yesterday, and she's going to make sauerkraut with no cabbage. So if you haven't seen that before, today's your day. So go ahead, Molly. I'm going to pass it over to you, and welcome everyone.
Lesley, it is a total and complete honor to be here with you today. Alaska Gathered and Grown. Today it's all gathered. I've gathered everything that we're going to use today to ferment, and the inspiration is sauerkraut. So using our Alaska wild plants that are edible, some medicinal as well. Usually with Alaskan plants, it's a little bit of both. And we're going to make a sauerkraut style ferment just completely with our own backyard materials. And I'm really excited to show you about that. And as Lesley mentioned earlier, last summer we did a ferment video, and I incorporated certain wild Alaskan plants into a cabbage recipe. And this one, I just wanted to shake it up completely and show you that you can indeed use all wild plants to ferment, and you don't need to grow the cabbage or buy the cabbage to ferment. And before we get started, I would just like everyone to take a moment, maybe take a deep breath and let it go. It's lunchtime. We're Lunch and Learn, this series, this wonderful cooking series that I'm blessed to be a part of. And I just want to place my hands on my heart and take a deep breath into my heart, sigh it out. I would like to say how honored I am to be residing on the lands of the Knik people. I would like to honor all of my ancestors, all of your ancestors, all those who came before and passed down knowledge throughout the centuries to us so that we could learn and grow and evolve. So I'd like to honor my ancestors in Nunavik, Nelson Island, St. Lawrence Island, Kamchatka Peninsula, Finland, County Kerry, Ireland. And I'd also like to honor all of those yet to come, all of the children, the grandchildren, the great-grandchildren, those that we are leaving this world to. So I breathe for them, and I thank you for your presence here. Koyana. Knowledge to me is one of the most important things in the world. If we have knowledge, we have power, and no one can take our knowledge away from us. So learning about ferments, this is a tried and true, age-old way of preserving fresh vegetables without having to can them, without having to freeze them. And also, by the byproduct of this preservation technique, creates a good bacteria environment, which feeds our own microbiome, encouraging healthy gut biology, right? So on most everything in the world is a bacteria called lactobacillus, right? That might sound familiar. It's the same culture, bacteria culture, that's used for milk to make yogurts and cheeses and sauerkraut and kimchi. And so this lactobacillus is actually on all living organisms in small amounts. And so I've wild harvested these greens from remote areas in Alaska. I say my backyard, but it's not, I got some of my dandelion here from my actual backyard, but a very short distance away from where I live here in Knik. is where these plants grow. And I can talk about where to find these plants as we start this process. So the basic principle of fermentation is we use salt as the catalyst. It's hydrophilic. It attracts water to it, right? It's not hydrophobic. It doesn't oppose water. Hydrophilic, it opens the cell walls of these luscious plants and allows the water to release from the cells, combining with the salt that we've added, creating a brine. And the brine is really, really important. The brine needs to be there because if we have any organic material that is above the level of the brine, right, we want a good like inch, half inch of liquid brine once we're with our finished ferment product, so that it creates an anaerobic environment. We don't want an aerobic environment, meaning air. We don't want this ferment to breathe. We want it to live underwater in the brine, in this saline solution, because it's in that brine, in that very salty environment, that the lactobacillus can thrive, and the other bacteria that might cause harmful bacteria or possibly even different kinds of molds, they won't grow in that salty environment. So I'll show you this sauerkraut recipe. And what's different about sauerkraut is often we use a big crock. This is called a crock. I have a big glass crock. This is a gallon. I don't think we'll fill it, but it's good to have a lot of room when you're doing ferments. I've got my torture device. This is what I use to pound up the greenery with the salt. So we actually use the process of either massage or mastication, essentially, what we do when we chew our food. We're self-masticating the plant with the salt to work out the brine and create the liquid. So another interesting aspect of sauerkraut that's a little bit different from the last ferment video, because my last ferment video is more just simple countertop in one mason jar. You know, maybe you make just a little bit. You can also make a little bit with this, but what I have here is soaking in a little bit of salt water solution, so almost like a brine of itself, are these ceramic stones. So these are weighted sauerkraut stones. And the purpose of this is during mass harvest of cabbage in Germany, right, where sauerkraut originates from. Sour, right? Kraut, meaning cabbage. So literally sour cabbage, the fermentation turns it sour. And so we're having, you know, sour twisted stalk. And what they would do is harvest the whole crop, and the whole town would get together with lots of crocks, usually made out of ceramic or clay, and they would make the sauerkraut in huge batches, often using caraway seeds because caraway is a digestive and native to the area. And they would use the stones to weight them down so that they wouldn't have to keep burping their ferment every single time. And that's really important to note. The stones actually will help keep the ferment weighted, the organic material weighted down into the brine. And then another aspect is usually in sauerkraut, they add a brine. So I've pre-made a brine just to make sure that the salt crystals dissolve. And the recipe for that is about 1 tablespoon to 2 cups of water. So I've made a quart, 4 cups of water, 2 tablespoons. I don't know if I'm going to use the whole bit, but saline solution is always a good thing to have on hand for many purposes. So let's get started. I'm going to go through the recipe list, and before I get started, I'm going to take a sip of my beverage. Okay, so the first ingredient, like I said, is salt. I've got sea salt here. Often I use Himalayan pink salt from the mountains in the Himalayas. So this is just white sea salt. Yesterday, I went harvesting and I picked up this beautiful bouquet of both fireweed with no flowers, so just fireweed greens, and twisted stalk. So I'm going to give you a couple examples of these so you can see what I'm talking about. These are fireweed before they bloom. And although I put them in a little bit of water, they're a little bit droopy, right? Every plant is best freshly picked, but they don't lose their nutritional value until they start breaking down. And these have not started breaking down. So we've got some beautiful, fresh fireweed. They are perennials, but they also have rootstock. So they do trail through underground and then connect underground via rhizomes. And now on the other side here, let me pick a beautiful one. Yeah. A good example. So this is a great example of twisted stalk. Twisted stalk is a wonderful plant to use in the spring as a spring green. And in the fall, in August, when the berries ripen, they are called watermelon berry. So you might be familiar with watermelon berry if you're not familiar with twisted stalk. And so characteristics. Sometimes this plant can be mistaken for something called false Solomon seal. It is poisonous. Make sure you identify correctly. I will go over the rough and dirty kind of, overview of what to look for to make sure it's twisted stalk. So first things first, we look at the stalk, and actually it's kind of twisted in this zigzag pattern. And let me get close to the camera so you can see. So, it's twisted in this nice zigzag pattern, and then each time it zags, a leaf forms, right? And then that might be an opportunity for the branching to occur. Now, another characteristic is false Solomon seal has one flowering bunch at the top of white flowers. Now, twisted stalk also has white flowers. You can see these really adorable little like fairy flowers. That's what will become the watermelon berry. But as you can see, they're underneath each single leaf. So when watermelon berry season comes in August, take a look at them. And as you lift up the end, the frond end, and you'll see how the berries attach to the underside, you can see how these look very similar because it is the same plant. Another identifying characteristic is how the leaves almost cup the stem, and the lines are parallel to the long side of the leaf. So the stems are crisp, and some people say they taste like cucumber. I just think they taste fresh, like fresh air or after a rainstorm. So something I love about twisted stalk as a green is, and we're actually going to use the flowers as well. We're going to use this whole plant. And one of the things I love about it as a green is that it is very water retentive. So it grows along riverbanks and streams. You'll find it in marshy areas, in slight shade. And because of that, it has a lot of moisture within it. And so it actually makes it a little bit easier to make the ferment with it. So we have that. Now we've got, of course, the obligatory fresh dandelion. These were a little bit dusty, so I washed them, and they don't look nearly as pretty washed and kind of jumbled. And so these are both spring dandelions, and I've mixed in a couple of bitter leaves, which is after it's come to a flower head, the leaves turn a bit bitter. I've got, of course, wild chives. If you joined us last week, you learned all about wild chives, and I have more. So we've got the beautiful purple flower tops, and we're going to add these for that oniony flavor. Here are some dandelion flower petals. I'm going to add that, as well as some spruce tips that just look so cherry and wonderfully limey. And they're going to add that citrusy flavor. And actually, like, you know, I might add garlic in certain ferments. Today, I'm going to use a very strong flavor and astringent flavor, but it's going to be spruce tips for extra vitamin C. And then we've got fresh rose petals, or sorry, not rose petals, rose leaves. So the leaves of the rose, and that's to show that you can actually eat every single part of the rose plant. And what's great about the new leaf is they haven't formed thorns yet. So you can pick them, you know, at this time of year, pick them right above where the thorn growth is, because that's last year's growth. So with that being said, those are the ingredients for our ferment tonight. And I'm going to start chopping everything very finely and adding it to my crock. I'm going to chop it in small portions, right? You can only fit so much on my cutting board. And then I'm going to sprinkle it with a little bit of salt, just a dusting, to allow the salt to penetrate in layers. So we're not adding a mass of plant material and then a mass of salt, because then it's really hard to regulate how much salt. And I believe there is a fine line of the perfect amount of salt, right? So this is the way I regulate it. So I'm going to start with our twisted stock, because it's so crisp and delicious. And as I cut this is an awesome opportunity to ask me questions. There's nutrient profiles on these plants, and I have some nutritional stats if you'd like to hear them. Also, if you have any, you know, stories or just random questions about ferments in general, I love questions. Please ask. I'm just going to chop away. Don't mind me.
Hey, Molly, I think people would love to hear about any nutritional stats that you would have. But I will, while you're chopping, I will tell you a little story about fall Solomon seal and watermelon berry that I had. And that was that I actually, you know, I really wanted watermelon berry in my yard. And as we know, it's difficult to buy and source native plants. And I actually went to a garden club sale. I won't mention which one in Anchorage. And I bought a plant labeled watermelon berry, and I brought it home. And literally for about 10 years, I wondered why I had no watermelon berries. And it really was not until I learned more about plants that I realized I had bought, you know, someone had the wrong label on it. It was false Solomon seal. It was not watermelon berry. And it was, you know, now, of course, and knowing more about plants, and it's exactly what you said, the flowering, you know, the flowering of the false Solomon seal is really at the top, and the watermelon berry is all through the plant, you know, the flowers. They are just about identical when they are shoots coming out of the ground. It's so hard to tell the difference. But it's like you mentioned, the leaf of the watermelon berry is perfoliate, I think is the botanical term, that the leaf, like the stem almost looks like it's going through the leaf.
Yes.
And, you know, it does have that twisted, funky stalk as well. And so I did, a friend of mine gave me some real watermelon berry plants, and I have them next to each other in the backyard. So it's cool when they come up, I can, you know, look and see and sort of test my ID ability at that point.
Oh, that's great. I love that. You know, that's like, I'm really glad that they didn't come to a berry, right? Because there might have been a temptation. Some poisonous berries look really delicious sometimes. And yeah, especially if you like buy it from a plant sale and it's labeled. Yeah, we definitely have to be careful. They mislabel houseplants. I mean, it definitely is worth our time if we're going to imbibe the plants that we harvest. And right, so it doesn't matter where you harvest. You can harvest in your own yard. You can harvest from your own garden with plants that you yourself have planted. And if you've been given the wrong information, then it can be harmful for you. And so, you know, Emily did absolutely correctly. She waited and then found the true twisted stock, right? And like, you know, had that intuition, right? Because we're working with plants and this is a cooking lesson, but we're talking about so much more here, right? We're talking about the microbiome, and the microbiome affects our brain. But more than that, we're talking about a community, right? These plants live in a community, and you and I live in a community. And we have innate instincts within our body that modern society has kind of like tried to drill out of us in a sense with technology. You know, it's getting harder to listen to that instinct. And so, Emily, that's a great example of you listening to your instinct and saying, like, I don't feel right about this, so I'm going to wait. And that's really wise. Like, no good medicine is a miracle, like an overnight cure, right? And so, like, all good medicine takes consistency and effort, and really wanting to be well. So thank you, Emily. I love that story because it really is a great example of listening to yourself. And when we're foraging, we really have to be certain. If you don't feel certain, get the books to make yourself feel certain, right? You know, support the authors that have put in the time to create this amazing content that you can put in your backpack and have with you on the trail, so you can correctly identify these plants. I think it's really, really important. And yeah, I think that places that sell plants need to do better. Definitely, right?
Yeah. Honestly, it was a great mistake because I learned so much. And now, you know, now I really know these two plants really well.
Yes. And that, you know, like these experiences we have with plants, we're building relationship, just like we do with humans. We build rapport, and we build rapport with plants. And so it's like getting to know them, getting to know how they act with water and how they act with your body with water, getting to know how they ferment, how they change taste when they ferment, because plants do. And also when they're dried, right? Like that's why I dry some plants. Peppermint, it's so strong dried. It's not a plant I mind drying. And so, but other plants like chives, like I said last week, I wouldn't pick to choose to dry chives to store, maybe freeze dried, but even then I do so little because I just don't think they taste as good. So it's like getting to know the plant and then working with it from there. And that's herb work. You know, that's the path of becoming an herb worker, a wild crafter, right? So we're all on the path, myself included. My old teacher, my fairy godmother, she used to say, you know, spend a year on each plant. And some people, you know, hear that and they're like, oh my gosh, a whole year on one plant. It's like, well, it's so that you can see it through all the stages of its life, and really allow it to really so you can have these experiences with the plant. Like you want to make everything you possibly can. You want to make a poultice, make a salve, make some ferments, you know, experiment with something, maybe tincture it, maybe make a glycerate, you know, do different menstruums. And that's how you can spend a year working with a plant and building that rapport. And I mean, how long, Emily, did you say it was 8 years you had it in your garden?
It's probably at least 10 years.
10 years. Yeah. So you built rapport with Solomon seal with false Solomon seal for 10 years. And that's like, you really got to see it every year. Right. So just checking in, I've got all of the twisted stalk chopped up. I've got the chives chopped up as well. I'm just incorporating some manual labor into this process and working some brine out. And that's looking pretty good. Apologies if it's loud with my mallet clanking against the side. So I wanted to show you real quick this fireweed. So we've got the fireweed greens, and because they haven't flowered yet, the stalk is pretty tender, and we're also fermenting it. And I'm going to do a slightly longer ferment since these are wild greens. So the stalk will soften even more, but I cut off the roots, and usually I don't pick the roots, but today or yesterday I did choose to pick the roots. And you can actually see the difference. They're pink, really pretty. So it's like the top is pink with the flowers and the root is pink. And then actually the shoots, which some people call Alaskan asparagus, is also pink, reddish pink, more dark burgundy. So I am going to tincture the roots. When I harvest, I don't just harvest for the project at hand. I also harvest for other projects I'm doing. So this is also used for men's health, prostate health, many different ailments. It's highly nutritive. So I'm going to use the menstruum of alcohol to tincture it. And then I might dilute it in a glycerate because it's a vegetable glycerin is slightly sweet, and it'll allow people to imbibe it a little bit easier for medicine. So I'm going to set that aside. Now, chop up all my fireweed greens. And yeah, if you can tear the base of the fireweed green, as you can see, they're this big, not fireweed fronds that can get that big, which are definitely flowering at that point. So those would be a woody stalk, and I wouldn't use those. I would strip just the leaves. But yes, you can continue to use the fireweed at any stage of its growth, any stage. So throwing that out there. It's just, the woodiness later in the season, maybe strip the leaves. You can use these. We have a recipe out there for a fresh salad. I love fireweed greens in my fresh salads because they're abundant, they're free, they're very nutritious, very high in antioxidants. They're basically a superpower in vitamin C and A. They're anti-inflammatory. They've been used as poultices throughout the centuries by many different ethnic people. And actually in Russia, they have something called, I believe it's called kapor tea. And Emily, if you wanted to speak more about this, because Emily made some and she gave me some, and it's so delicious. It's a fermented fireweed leaf tea. So we're making a ferment, and this is a different way of fermenting fireweed. So Emily, tell me about it.
Sure, it's one of my favorite things. So fermented fireweed tea, or Ivan chai is what they call it in Russia. And it's, as far as I know, Alaska Native people don't have this tradition. It's something we borrowed from over there. And you strip the leaves, you crush them and let them ferment a little bit, and then dry them, and it makes an incredible tea. There's probably 50 YouTube videos you can look up about it, but it's really great. And more and more people are doing it every year. I think I've even seen fireweed tea for sale now, and it's not just dried leaves, but you ferment it for a little bit. And it has a wonderful sweet taste. People cannot believe it's like, these are just leaves. These are not the flowers. And it's true. It's just the leaves. You let them wilt for a day. You crush them and roll them, just kind of like this sort of motion with your hands. And then you let it ferment for, maybe 2 days until it smells nice and sweet. And then you dry it. And it's incredible taste.
Oh, thank you, Emily. I love that. And, I've personally got to experience it. It's so delicious. And I actually was able to make it into one of my kombucha batches, and it made one of the best kombucha batches. The fermentation seemed to get along really well with the SCOBY, I guess. So I love it. Thank you so much for sharing that. And right now I am chopping up these dandelion greens. And I decided to chop a bunch at once, so that was more difficult than it needed to be, but it's all good. And the thing about chopping vegetables, at least in my kitchen, I don't know if you have this problem, but in my kitchen, I make a mess and there are greens everywhere. There's greens on my feet right now. It just happens. And then I just sweep them up and then I bring them outside. So now I'm gonna have these spruce tips, chop them up fairly fine. It's gonna be fairly easy because they're pretty soft, but I'm gonna go a couple directions on them just to make sure that they get at least most of the length of them chopped down. We don't, if we bit into a big piece of spruce tip, it might be a little abrupt. And one of the things I love about sauerkraut is as the fermentation breaks down the plant, and actually it's digesting the plant in a sense. So as it does that, it changes the flavors, as I mentioned before, but it also changes the consistency of the vegetables, the plants. And as you can see, some of the needles are just so tiny, and it's going to look so pretty all sprinkled up in there, mixed with the greens. Now I have my new rose leaves. I have about a smushed handful. And this rose is one of my favorite plants in the world, especially Arctic rose, because it hasn't been bred to be beautiful. It's just beautiful in its own right, and it has the most amazing smell. And rose is full of vitamin A and C as well, and it's just like the essence of happiness to me. So spruce tip is also high in vitamin C, definitely high in vitamin C, lots of different recipes for that. But I looked online and I couldn't find any recipes for fermented spruce tip. So here is, now we have a fermented spruce tip recipe. It's also high in beta carotene. So just so you know, we don't always have to eat our carrots to get beta carotene. Just real quick, talking about twisted stalk, it's in the lily family, and if you want to know where to find it, it's in moist woods and meadows throughout. It's in southeast, south central, western Alaska, and the Aleutian Islands. It blooms mid-June to late July, and then berries in August. So another characteristic that I don't think I mentioned before is in full bigger growth twisted stalk, there are hairs on the very bottom of the plant, but there's no hairs on the majority of it. It's just at the very base. It's, some people say it's dark, but in my experience, it's been like, you know, tan colored hairs, sometimes dark, but yes, there are little hairs on the bottom of the twisted stalk. So that's another way to identify. And I was going to add yarrow today, but instead, usually I have a bunch of yarrow literally in my backyard, but I have these wonderful dandelion flowers instead. So I'm going to chop up the dandelion flowers, add that in, a little bit of color, some sunshine, and more nutrients. Dandelion is another plant that grows here that every single part of the plant is edible, and most of it is medicinal as well. So the root, the stem, and the flower, the leaf, stem, flower. So the one thing I'd like to add is super special, I found in the woods a patch of bluebells. So you might know bluebells as chiming bells because there is a different type of bluebell that grows in Europe. So it's also called lungwort before the bells bloom. So let me grab those from my refrigerator. I picked these yesterday and they are notoriously hard to keep. So I had a little bit of water left in my water bottle, and actually I kept, you know, the moisture in there, and put my bluebell flowers directly in the water bottle and moved it straight to my refrigerator. And I found that this, when foraging, this way it doesn't crush the flowers because these are delicate. And I just love the taste of these. Let me show you up close. These beautiful bluebells, right? And they droop. Let me show you an example. I've also heard them called the languid lady, right? Flowers are the feminine, and you know, languid, what a great word. So they are, you know, languidly resting on the stem. And a characteristic of lungwort is it's a really unique green, but they're hairy. They've got these fine hairs. And lungwort is, as its name implies, really good for your lungs. So a very strong medicinal. It blooms in June and July. So if you want to get the lungwort, you need to harvest it before that. And that's why we follow the cycle throughout the season, throughout the entire year, because we want to know what it looks like correctly, know what it looks like in the spring before the flowers, the distinctive flowers, give it away. Okay, so I'm actually just gonna super easy pop the flowers, and I'm going to save the leaves for another project. And I can use a little bit of the leaf, but I don't really want to use much of it. I'm gonna add some color, some sweetness, because there is nectar right up at the base of the flowers. And bluebells has always been a favorite on hikes, you know, as you walk. Just, I used to just pick them growing up as I hiked. And great snack. They're in the borage family, so a lot of medicinal properties. It grows in woods and meadows throughout Alaska, right? So I think you would find, you would be hard pressed to find it except for north of the Brooks Range. And I believe southeast doesn't have very much of it. But other than that, almost everywhere else and the circumpolar north and south, bluebells grow. So this is a wonderful plant, lungwort. Now, we still have to mix this all together, add a little bit of the brine, because the wild plants aren't going to be nearly as full of moisture, because they're better at surviving, right? Surviving without the water available of consistent farming. So really, they're a little bit dry, and we will need to add the brine. So I'm going to go ahead and actually add a little bit of the brine now. It's all diluted. We've got the saline solution. Add a little bit, about a cup and a half, and then we swish together. And honestly, this tool is designed to make life easier. Do I find it makes my life easier? No, often not. I like to use my hands when I masticate or massage my ferments. And so that's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to sterilize my hands, and I'm going to get in there, roll my sleeves up, because it works so much better. Like, we can make all the tools in the world to, you know, bypass certain projects, but ultimately sometimes our hands work the best. And then we have that pride of making something with our hands, which is another aspect of wellness, right? Creation, using our creative potential to create anything, art, music, plant medicine, food, you know, laughter, anything. So I'm almost done with these bluebells. Oops. And now, because my elbows are not sterile, I'm about to sterilize my elbows. I keep a bottle of 91% isopropyl alcohol in my fridge, or sorry, not in my fridge, in my kitchen, because it's good for everything. You can sterilize bottles that way. You can sterilize arms, countertops, utensils, people's phones, right? So it's good for a lot of things. So I'm actually just going to get right in there. I want to get to the bottom, see how much moisture is on the bottom. I'm checking, and it does feel like actually quite a good bit. And I'm just massaging it. I'm using my hand to massage. And as I do this, if anyone has questions about fermentation or the plants I've used here today, please ask. I would love, you know me, I love questions, so please ask. And until then, I will talk about what this smells like. And it kind of smells like a really delicious green goddess salad dressing, right? We've got a lot of different greenery, beautiful notes of the flowers and the bitter of the dandelion. Speaking of the bitter of the dandelion, that is really good for digestion. Bitters in our digestive system, it's one of the tastes that helps us produce more gastric acid, so it actually helps us digest. And I know that a lot of people suffer from heartburn, but most people, when they suffer from heartburn, the go-to method is to have you know, a Tums or some kind of antacid. And really, that's counterintuitive, because when we have an antacid, we're actually stopping the response that our body naturally went into to protect ourselves. So we would maybe add some ginger, that could help, but some ferment juice, some brine, that could help. We could also stop using antacids and add more acidic foods into our diet, thus increasing you know, the acid in our stomach, and then allowing ourselves to digest the food, because we're having that response, that overproduction of acid, because we need to have more acid. We need to digest it. So, and this is independent of your doctor's suggestion. I am not a doctor. Please consult your doctor for any of your own personal healthcare needs. And with that being said, I would also like to add that it's also independent of having physiological differences in our esophagus, right? Sometimes people have acid reflux or GERD because the sphincters of their anatomy are actually not shutting all the way. And so that can cause GERD. So for as much as I diss this tool for the mastication part, where it's helpful is actually settling down, tamping our ferment down into the bottom. And so I can already tell I'm going to need to add more brine. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. And I'm going to add the whole quart. So 4 cups, that's 2 tablespoons of liquid. Let's stir it all up.
Molly, while you're doing that, Jennifer had an interesting comment. She said, I've read that the American food supply is trying to eliminate bitter. So it's interesting to hear bitter is useful to digestion.
Oh, Oh, that is interesting. Okay, the American food supply.
I think just sort of in general, or if Jennifer, you want to unmute yourself.
Yeah, I'd love to hear more about that because I haven't heard that.
Yes, I believe I read it like in the New York Times, but as you know, processed foods, they're trying to eliminate the bitter taste because people do not like it. Or it's perceived people don't like it.
Yeah, you know, that's actually true. In the modern American diet, some people call it the SAD diet or the standard American diet. It's kind of the diet that's been force-fed down Alaska Natives' throats and reservation folks, American Indian, indigenous peoples folks, kind of shoved down our throats for a while now. How to eat, right? Like, this is how you eat. And you know, it's not the healthiest diet in the world. And it's really interesting. There's not a lot of bitters present in that diet, right? You're not going to get something that's a bitter, like a carminative bitter, in McDonald's, or like even in like the deli section of cars, right? So like food scientists, like these companies hire food scientists, and food scientists actually tease out molecules that taste good, and they formulate these amazing concoctions that make us addicted to flavors. So Oreo was one of the first companies to come out and talk about this. Maybe I shouldn't say that name, you know, okay, whatever. We can blank that out. It's a cookie with the white cream filling, and it's chocolate on the outside. And they, you know, they really put a lot of money and effort into making this most addictive cookie. And it worked. I mean, it's one of the most best-selling cookies ever. And literally it's a combination of chemicals, no bitters, it's sweet, it's a little salty, it's got a mouth feel. I mean, there's literally like science going into how it coats the tongue, and like, right, like how, and that's like fat, right? So it's like eating muktak. How does that coat your tongue? You know, that's a mouth feel. And so they, you know, this research, I just find it really fascinating, because when I, as an herbalist, prescribe bitters, it does help with digestion. It's a really good digestive aid. And what I love about it is it's not a really abrupt digestive aid. I'm taking out my stones now. They've been soaking. And there's writing on one side and it's flat on the other. So I'm going to put the writing face down. And then, yeah, so, you know, it wouldn't surprise me that some kind of governing agency would say, hey, perhaps people don't like bitter, because yes, I give them dandelion leaf and people are like, you know, they pucker their mouth, it hits a certain part of their tongue, they don't like it. But if you use little bits and you slowly add it, I mean, if we think about it, in the 1800s, we would have aperitifs before dinner. And in aperitifs, we would have bitters, which would be a like gentian tincture with other herbs, sometimes orange peels, that were full of bitters. Gentian is a really bitter plant, and they would add that to like seltzer water or cocktails, and they would drink that before a meal as a carminative bitter, so that they would digest their food better, because it helps you digest proteins better. So if you were going to have a feast, especially a feast back in the day where it might not be easy to get that food, then definitely you would want to be able to digest all the nutrients, all the protein from it. So thank you for sharing that. That's really interesting. I'm going to look more into that. And we are very close to our time, but as you can see, I've added my stones. I'm going to wipe off the exterior. I see Lesley there popping up. Hi, Lesley. And I'm a big fan of, you know, just making everything look nice. I don't like to have a greenery on the side of the jar. So I take a clean paper towel and actually wipe that off so that, well, it'll usually dries, but you know, sometimes, I mean, it's organic material. Sometimes it could rot. And so I'm going to give this another press down under the broth. And then I will show you the finished product.
So while Molly is finishing up, we want to thank everyone for joining us today. Oh, that looks so beautiful. She's going to do some movie magic because she made a ferment for us a little earlier so we can kind of see what it looks like after a little bit of time. So that will be exciting. And I just wanted to add on the bitters side of things, leafy greens are a really great bitter food that we can incorporate in so many different ways into our foods, into our meals and dishes, including herbs. There's a reason why cilantro is very controversial because actually it's got pretty bitter compounds in it that are medicinal to us, but some of us are born with more taste buds than others. So some of us taste that bitter flavor a little stronger. So if anyone, you know, personally has a story about, oh, I tried cilantro and it was really soapy, you actually have more taste buds than I do, right? So cilantro really does taste different to you. So keep that in mind with bitters. That's why they say a spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down. That's why we put a little bit of honey in our vinaigrette when we put it on our salad. And then you can get the benefits of that bitter, but it might not be as oppressive to your mouth. So yeah, I just wanted to add that in. So Molly, let's see what the final ferment looks like.
So this is from a previous ferment, and this is just to kind of show, this has some cabbage in it and it has some red pepper, so it's a different color, right? Just to kind of show you variety. My hands are clean, so don't worry. And I'm just going to show, like, look at how limp and it's like pre-digested leaves, right? So it's super soft. I can almost break it with my fingernail. Yeah, I can break it with my fingernail. And it's just a really soft, delicious, fragrant. So you want it to ferment for 3 to 7 days, and it depends on how warm your house is, right? So if you have a really warm house, maybe 3 days. If you have a really hot or cold house, you know, maybe 7, 8, 9 days. In the summertime, it tends to go quicker. You don't want to put it in direct sunlight, but I do recommend keeping it on your counter. And the final step in this is you can take cheesecloth or, you know, village style. I use paper towel. Sometimes cheesecloth has big enough gaps that fruit flies can actually get through. And I really, once you get fruit flies, my goodness. So I take my rubber band and my double piece of paper towel, loop it around the entire top. We don't want any fruit flies coming and bugging our ferment. And especially this time of year, they are around, they will breed in there. And it will ruin your ferment because they will lay their larva. And so you will start to see bubbles on the side. And that's why we call it burping the ferment. We will burp it. The stone is going to manually burp it by weight. But if it seems like it's really warm the next couple of days in my house and it seems like it's burp or it's like gassish, it's so gassy that it's lifting the stones, I might open it up, press down the stones. The stones make it really easy. You can buy small glass stones that have little handles that you can sterilize and press down into mason jars. Those work really well if you're doing it on a smaller scale. And yeah, at any point in the fermentation process, even right now, you can taste test it. So you can taste a little bit of the brine, you can taste a little bit of the green, and you can taste it every day and just notice the subtlety in the fermentation. And then you can decide what level of fermentation do you like, because stop it there. You're going to put it in the fridge and then it'll last, you know, up to 6 months, a really long time in the fridge. And it will still actually continue to ferment. So, you know, once you leave it the 6 months, it's going to be a little bit funkier. maybe, you know, just a little bit funkier than when you put it in there. But hopefully you'll eat it before then and enjoy some great digestive health, you and your whole family, right? And making this and knowing, having this knowledge as power gives you the ability to share it with your friends and family and support their health and their gut bacteria and their microbiome and their brain health. So this is a way we can help heal our community.
I love that. Fermenting veggies can help us heal the community. It's so true though, because the greens in there are going to feed the bacteria in your gut, and it's going to deposit more beneficial bacteria in your gut. So it only gets better, and it's way cheaper than buying like a probiotic pill from the store, right? The wild ferments really are going to be such a stronger, more delicious medicine.
Oh, and actually, I wanted to add one more thing, and Lesley, you might be able to talk more about small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, SIBO. So that's kind of, I've heard it a lot in the wellness community, right? Wellness community being a very broad range of subjects, but I've heard it a lot and approached very many different ways. And what is wonderful about fermenting is it actually breaks down some of those sulfuric compounds that actually agitate the SIBO side effects. And even in cabbage, like cabbage is contraindicated for SIBO, right? So is onions and chives and any of the garlics. Not saying that you should still add the garlic and the chive, but you might still use a little bit of cabbage and all of these other grains, and then make a ferment that would be more friendly to your own personal needs, as opposed to like a generic recipe for everyone, right? We're all individuals and we all have individual needs. And it's really important that we take care of ourselves, because who else is going to do it? If we can't take care of ourselves, no one else will. And then we can take care of the ones we love even better.